A young billionaire buys an abandoned hotel, but is paralyzed when he discovers, in the basement, a little boy taking care of triplet babies. The revelations that follow change his life forever. The rising sun painted the horizon in golden hues as Thomas Blackwood, the young titan of the construction world, straightened his silk tie in front of the mirror. His deep blue eyes, reminiscent of the ocean, reflected a blend of determination and an inexplicable emptiness he himself could not fully comprehend. At 30 years old, Thomas had already achieved more than many do in a lifetime, yet something always seemed to be missing. Another day, another deal, he muttered to himself, grabbing the keys to his silver Aston Martin. The engine roared to life, echoing through the empty corridors of the mansion he called home. An imposing house, certainly, but one that lacked the warmth of a true home. As he drove through the streets of a city that felt too small for his ambitions, Thomas couldn't help but think of Margaret, his mother. A strong woman who had raised him alone, smiling in the face of adversity with unconditional love in her heart. Still, there was always that unspoken question lingering between them. Who was his father? Why had he left? His cell phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Jenkins, his assistant. "Mr. Blackwood, don't forget the inspection in the southern area today. It's quite a run-down region." Thomas frowned. "Run-down? Jenkins, you know those are exactly the places where we find the best opportunities." Hanging up, Thomas smiled. Turning the forsaken into the extraordinary was his specialty. That was what he was good at. That was where he found purpose, or at least tried to. Arriving at the inspection site, Thomas immediately noticed the difference. Narrow streets, buildings worn by time, a melancholic aura hovering in the air like a persistent mist. His experienced eyes examined each structure, calculating costs, imagining possibilities. That was when he saw it. Rising like a ghost from the past, an old hotel stood out amid the desolate landscape. Its dusty windows looked like tired eyes, observing the world change around them. The facade, once grand, was now scarred by time and neglect. Thomas felt something strange, an inexplicable connection, as though the building itself were calling to him. His feet carried him to the entrance before he realized it, ignoring the signs reading "condemned property" and "no trespassing." "Mr. Blackwood," Jenkins's voice sounded distant. "The reports show that renovating this place would be extremely costly. The challenges are huge." But Thomas no longer heard him. His fingers touched the rusty doorknob, and a shiver ran down his spine. It felt as though the hotel was alive, pulsating under his touch. "I'm going to buy it," he declared, his voice firm and decisive. Jenkins gasped. "But sir, the costs, the risks." Thomas turned, his eyes shining with fierce determination. "Sometimes, Jenkins, we have to follow our instincts. This place, it has a story to tell, and I want to be part of it." With a quick phone call, the corporate gears began to turn. Within hours, the abandoned hotel had a new owner. Thomas Blackwood, the entrepreneur who turned ruins into gold, had found his next project. Or perhaps, unbeknownst to him, the project had found him. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the city, Thomas returned to the hotel. This time, he was alone. The old key creaked in the lock, and the door opened with a prolonged groan, as though the building itself were awakening from a long slumber. The lobby, once grand, was now a sea of dust and forgotten memories. Carved chandeliers held secrets of past parties, and the reception desk seemed to be patiently waiting for guests to return. Thomas took a deep breath, sensing the scent of history and possibilities. His footsteps echoed through the empty space, each step stirring memories that were not his, yet felt strangely familiar. That was when he heard it. A sound so out of place in that setting of abandonment that, for a moment, Thomas thought his mind was playing tricks on him. The distant cry of a baby. His heart raced. That was impossible. The hotel had been abandoned for years. No one could be there. Yet the sound persisted, now accompanied by hurried whispers. Driven by curiosity and by a sense of urgency, he could not explain. Thomas followed the sound. His steps led him away from the lobby, through dark corridors and creaking staircases, until he found himself facing a door that led to the basement. The darkness below was almost palpable. Thomas hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the light switch. Part of him wanted to turn around, walk away, and forget what he had heard. But something stronger compelled him to continue. With a click, a weak and flickering light illuminated the steps descending into the unknown. Thomas went down slowly, each step echoing like thunder in the oppressive silence. The basement was a maze of dusty boxes, broken furniture, and dancing shadows. The crying had stopped, but Thomas could sense a presence. Someone or something was there, hidden, watching. "Hello?" His voice sounded strange in his own ears. "Is anyone there?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a sudden movement behind a stack of boxes made Thomas turn quickly. His heart nearly stopped at what he saw. A pair of frightened eyes stared at him from the darkness, the eyes of a child. "Please," came a trembling whisper, "don't hurt us." Thomas felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. There, huddled in a corner of the basement, was a boy no older than 6. But what made Thomas's blood run cold was what the boy was protecting with his small body. 3 babies, each about a year old. "Oh my God," Thomas murmured, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. The boy, realizing Thomas was not an immediate threat, spoke again, his voice a mixture of fear and pleading. "Please, sir, don't separate us. I promised Mom I'd take care of them." Thomas knelt slowly, trying not to scare the children. "It's all right," he said, his voice as gentle as possible. "No one is going to hurt you." "What's your name?" "Paul," the boy answered, still wary. "Paul," Thomas repeated, feeling a wave of unnamed emotions rise within him. "I'm Thomas. Can you tell me how you ended up here?" Paul hesitated, his eyes darting between Thomas and the babies. "Mum said it was safe here, that no one would find us. She said she'd come back." Thomas's heart clenched. How many days had these children been there? How had they survived? And where was their mother? Thousands of questions swirled in his mind, but Thomas knew he had to act quickly. These children needed help, food, and a safe place to stay. "Paul," he said, extending his hand, "do you trust me to help you?" The boy looked at the outstretched hand, then at the babies and back at Thomas. There was something in the businessman's eyes, some sincerity that even Paul so young could recognize. "Will you promise not to separate us?" Paul asked, his voice trembling slightly. Thomas felt the weight of that promise. He knew he should call the authorities, that there were protocols to follow. But looking at those children, at Paul's courage in protecting his siblings, Thomas made a decision that would change his life forever. "I promise," he said firmly. "I'll take care of all of you." Carefully, Thomas helped Paul stand, and together they picked up the babies. The successful businessman, who hours earlier cared only about contracts and profits, now held a child in each arm, with Paul beside him, carrying the 3rd baby. As they climbed the basement stairs, leaving the darkness and cold behind, Thomas realized he was venturing into unknown territory. He had no idea how to care for children, let alone 4 at once. His mansion, so empty and cold, suddenly seemed like the only safe place to take them. When they reached the hotel lobby, the evening light filtered through the dusty windows, bathing the unlikely group in a golden glow. Thomas looked at Paul, at the babies in his arms, and then back at the hotel that had called to him so mysteriously. In that moment, Thomas Blackwood, the solitary entrepreneur, felt something change within him. The emptiness that had haunted him for so long began to fill with something new: purpose, responsibility, and though he did not yet know it, love. As they walked out of the hotel, heading toward an uncertain future, Thomas made a silent vow. He would protect these children, discover their story, and in the process, perhaps find the answers to the questions that had tormented him for so long. The sun set on the horizon, marking the end of one day and the beginning of a journey none of them could have predicted. Thomas Blackwood, the man who built empires of concrete and steel, was about to build something far more precious: a family. Carefully, Thomas helped the children into his luxurious car, a surreal sight that stood in stark contrast to the decaying surroundings. Paul, still holding one of the babies, looked wide-eyed at the car's interior, likely the most expensive thing he had ever seen. "It's all right, Paul. You're safe now," Thomas assured him, his voice gentle yet firm. As he drove back to his mansion, Thomas cast frequent glances in the rearview mirror, watching the children. His mind raced, trying to process the day's events and plan the next steps. He knew he was entering unknown and potentially dangerous territory by not immediately informing the authorities, but something deep inside told him this was the right thing to do. When they arrived at the mansion, Paul's reaction was one of pure astonishment. The boy gaped at the imposing structure, his eyes reflecting the lights that illuminated the facade. "Let's go inside," Thomas said softly, helping them out of the car. "You must be hungry." Inside the house, the contrast between the children's situation and the mansion's luxury became even more obvious. Thomas quickly improvised, turning his living room into a safe space for the babies, using pillows and soft blankets. While preparing something for the children to eat, a task for which he felt completely unprepared, Thomas observed Paul caring for the babies with a maturity that broke his heart. It was clear the boy had taken on a protective role far beyond his years. "Paul," Thomas called gently, approaching with a tray of food, "can you tell me more about how you ended up in that hotel?" The boy hesitated, his eyes darting nervously between Thomas and the babies. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and trembling. "Mom said it was only for a while. She promised she'd come back. She said it was too dangerous to stay at home, that someone bad might find us." Thomas felt a knot tighten in his throat. The story was clearly more complex and perhaps darker than he had initially imagined. "You're doing an amazing job taking care of your siblings, Paul," Thomas praised him, seeing how the boy lit up at the acknowledgement. "But now you can rest a bit. I promise I'll take care of all of you." As the children ate and the babies finally fell asleep, exhausted, Thomas found himself staring at his phone, his finger hovering over the emergency number. He knew that the proper thing to do would be to call the authorities right away, but something held him back. The fear in Paul's eyes, the promise he had made, and a strange sense that this encounter was no coincidence made him hesitate. Finally, Thomas made a decision. He called his personal attorney, explaining the situation in vague terms and asking for guidance on how to proceed legally to protect the children without immediately involving the system. Hanging up the phone, Thomas returned to the living room where he found Paul struggling to keep his eyes open, clearly exhausted, but determined to continue watching over the babies. "It's all right, Paul. You can sleep. I'll keep an eye on everyone," Thomas assured him, helping the boy settle onto a comfortable sofa. As Paul finally succumbed to sleep, Thomas sat in a nearby armchair, his eyes taking in the unusual scene in his living room. 4 children, who had appeared out of nowhere, had completely upended his world in a matter of hours. The night's silence was broken only by the soft sounds of the sleeping children's breathing. Thomas, still in his now wrinkled suit, felt a wave of emotions wash over him. Fear, doubt, but also a strange sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. Gazing out the window at the city slowly drifting off to sleep, Thomas Blackwood knew his life had changed irrevocably. The man who had awakened that morning, lonely, focused solely on business and success, no longer existed. In his place stood someone on the brink of a journey for which he felt completely unprepared, yet strangely destined. With a deep sigh, Thomas leaned back in the armchair, his eyes never leaving the sleeping children. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges and possible dangers. But for the first time in a long while, the emptiness that had always accompanied him felt just a little less vast. The chapter of Thomas's life as a solitary entrepreneur had come to an end. A new chapter, filled with mysteries, challenges, and perhaps the chance to build the family he had always secretly wanted, was only just beginning. The rising sun found Thomas Blackwood asleep in his armchair, still wearing his rumpled suit, with its first rays dancing across his tired face. The soft crying of one of the babies woke him, pulling him back into the surreal reality that was now his life. Rubbing his eyes, Thomas stood up, observing the children around him. Paul, the 6-year-old boy, was already awake, trying to calm his youngest sister. The sight made Thomas's heart tighten. "Good morning, Paul," Thomas said softly, Let me help you with her. As Thomas picked up the crying baby girl, the enormity of the situation hit him like a freight train. He, a successful businessman accustomed to million-dollar contracts and complex negotiations, now found himself completely lost in the face of a dirty diaper. "Paul, you know how to change diapers?" Thomas asked, feeling ridiculously inadequate. The boy nodded shyly, picking up one of the diapers Thomas had hastily bought the night before. With surprising skill for someone so young, Paul guided Thomas through the process, explaining each step with a seriousness that broke Thomas's heart. As they took care of the babies, Thomas's mind raced. He knew he couldn't go on like this. He needed help, someone who understood children, who could navigate the legal aspects of this unusual situation. That was when he remembered Claire Thompson, a social worker he had met a few months earlier at a charity event organized by his company. Thomas remembered her as a determined woman with kind eyes and a palpable passion for her work. With the children momentarily calm and fed, thanks to a mix of instinct and Paul's instructions, Thomas picked up his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, hesitant. Calling Claire meant involving an outsider, potentially complicating the situation even more. But he knew he had no other choice. The phone rang several times before Claire answered, her voice still thick with sleep. "Claire Thompson speaking." "Claire, this is Thomas Blackwood. We met at the New Horizons Foundation event. I need your help." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Blackwood, it's a bit early for business calls, don't you think?" Thomas took a deep breath. "This isn't a business call, Claire. It's personal and urgent. Can I trust your discretion?" Something in Thomas's voice must have alerted Claire to the seriousness of the situation. Her tone changed, becoming more focused, professional. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. What's going on?" I found some children, 4 to be precise, a 6-year-old boy and 3 babies. They were abandoned, and I brought them to my house." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas could practically hear the gears turning in Claire's mind. "Mr. Blackwood," she finally spoke, her voice a mix of shock and concern. "Are you telling me you have 4 undocumented children in your home right now?" "Yes," Thomas replied, feeling the weight of his actions. "I know I should have called the authorities immediately, but..." "Claire, they were terrified. The boy, Paul, he begged me not to separate them. I couldn't." Claire sighed heavily. "I understand your concern, Mr. Blackwood, but you must realize how serious this is legally." "I know," Thomas interrupted. "That's why I'm calling you. I need help, Claire. Help taking care of these children and navigating this situation legally. Please." Another pause, longer this time. Thomas could hear the conflict in Claire's breathing. "All right," she finally said. "I'll be there in an hour. Send me your address. And Mr. Blackwood, don't talk to anyone else about this until I arrive." Thomas felt immense relief flood his body. "Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much." Hanging up, Thomas turned back to the children. Paul watched him with sharp eyes, clearly having listened in on the conversation. "It's all right, Paul," Thomas assured him. "A friend of mine is coming to help us. She's really good with kids." Paul nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Thomas's. "She won't take us away, will she?" Thomas's heart squeezed. "No, Paul. I promised I'd take care of you, remember? And I always keep my promises." The next hour passed in a blur of diapers, bottles, and Thomas's clumsy attempts to entertain the children. When the doorbell finally rang, he felt both relieved and apprehensive. Claire Thompson stood at the door, her professional stance contrasting with the surprise in her eyes at the sight of Thomas, still in his rumpled suit, holding a baby in his arms. "Mr. Blackwood," she greeted, her voice controlled. "May I come in?" Thomas nodded, stepping aside. As Claire entered, her gaze traveled around the room, taking in the surreal scene. Paul sat on the floor, quietly playing with the other 2 babies. "Claire, this is Paul," Thomas introduced. "Paul, this is Ms. Thompson. She's here to help us." Paul looked at Claire with a mix of fear and curiosity. Claire, in turn, knelt down to his eye level. "Hello, Paul," she said gently. "I'm glad to meet you." In the minutes that followed, Claire observed Thomas interacting with the children. Despite his obvious inexperience, there was a genuine kindness and concern in his actions that surprised her. Finally, with the children occupied by some improvised toys, Claire pulled Thomas aside. "Mr. Blackwood," she began quietly, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened, every detail." Thomas nodded, casting a worried glance at the children before guiding Claire to his office. There, he recounted the events of the previous day, from discovering the abandoned hotel to his impulsive decision to bring the children home. Claire listened carefully, her face a mask of professionalism, though Thomas could see the internal struggle in her eyes. "Mr. Blackwood," she said when he finished, "I understand your intentions, but you must see how serious this is. Legally, what you did could be considered kidnapping." Thomas paled. "But I couldn't leave them there, Claire. You didn't see how scared they were, how hungry." Claire raised a hand, interrupting him. "I understand, and believe me, I've seen similar situations, but now we have to act carefully. First, we need to establish the identity of these children and find their mother." Thomas nodded, feeling a mixture of relief at having someone competent on his side and fear about what might happen next. "What can we do?" he asked. "First," Claire replied, "I'll talk to Paul. He seems to be our best source of information right now. Meanwhile, you can look for any documents or clues that might be left behind at the hotel." Thomas agreed, grateful for a clear direction. While he prepared to head back to the hotel, Claire approached Paul, her voice gentle and reassuring. "Paul," she called softly, sitting next to the boy, "can you tell me a bit about your mum?" Paul looked nervously at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "Mum's name is Sophie," Paul began hesitantly. She used to work in that big hotel, the one where Mr. Thomas found us." Claire exchanged a meaningful glance with Thomas. It was a start. The following hours were a mixture of careful investigation and makeshift childcare. Thomas returned to the hotel, searching the basement for any clues about Sophie or the children's identities. Meanwhile, Claire alternated between gently questioning Paul and helping with the babies, her professional experience proving invaluable. Late in the afternoon, when Thomas returned with a dusty box he'd found hidden in a corner of the basement, they had their first major breakthrough. "Claire, look at this," Thomas called, pulling an envelope from the box. Inside was a faded photo of a young, smiling woman wearing a hotel uniform. On the back it read, "Sophie Lawson, Employee of the Year, 2019. Claire examined the picture, her face lighting up with recognition. "I remember her," she said softly. "Sophie Lawson. She came to my office about 2 years ago looking for help. She was pregnant and had just lost her job." Thomas felt his heart tighten. "What happened?" Claire shook her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I referred her to some assistance programs, but she never came back. I thought maybe she found help elsewhere." Looking at Paul, who was watching the conversation with keen interest, Thomas felt a wave of determination. "We'll find her, Claire. We have to find her." Claire nodded, her expression softening as she looked at the children. "Yes, we will. But Thomas, you need to understand that even if we do find her, there are no guarantees. The legal situation here is complicated." Thomas swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. "I know, but I can't abandon them now." "I can't." Claire studied him for a long moment, as though seeing Thomas Blackwood for the first time. "You really do care about them, don't you?" Thomas looked at Paul, who was helping one of the babies hold a toy, and felt something warm and unfamiliar swell in his chest. "More than I thought possible," he admitted softly. The days that followed were a roller coaster of emotions and challenges. With Claire's invaluable help, Thomas threw himself headlong into caring for the children while simultaneously searching for clues about Sophie's whereabouts. Claire practically moved into Thomas's mansion, her presence bringing a sense of normalcy and structure the children desperately needed. She taught Thomas the basics of childcare, from preparing bottles to dealing with nighttime nightmares. Paul gradually began to open up. With Claire's gentle patience and Thomas's constant, protective presence, the boy started sharing more about his life before the abandoned hotel. "Mom always said we were special," Paul recounted one night, as Thomas tucked him into bed. "That one day we'd have a big, beautiful house like this." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "Your mum was right, Paul. You really are special." As days turned into weeks, Thomas was surprised by the strength of the bond he was forming with the children. He found himself eager to come home after long business meetings, eager to hear Paul's stories about his day or see the new tricks the triplets had learned. Claire observed this transformation with a mixture of admiration and concern. One night, after the children were asleep, she confronted Thomas in his office. "Thomas," she began, using his first name for the first time, "I need you to be honest with me. What do you expect to happen here?" Thomas looked at her, surprised by the direct question. "What do you mean?" Claire sighed, sitting in the chair across from his desk. "We've been searching for Sophie for weeks. If we find her, or worse, but if we don't find her, you're getting attached to these children, Thomas. They're getting attached to you. But you need to understand this might be temporary." Thomas felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. The thought of losing the children, of seeing Paul and the triplets taken out of his life, was almost unbearable. "Guys, I don't know, Claire," he admitted, his voice rough. "All I know is that I can't abandon them. I can't let them go into the system and be separated. They're a family." Claire looked at him for a long moment, her eyes gentle yet worried. "And you? Do you see yourself as part of that family now?" The question caught Thomas off guard. He'd never thought of it in those terms, but now that Claire said it, he realized it was true. At some point, without him noticing, these 4 children had become his family. I think I do," he answered softly, the realization hitting him hard. Claire nodded, as though confirming something she had suspected all along. "Thomas, you have to be prepared. Finding Sophie is our priority. But if we can't, well, there are many legal hurdles for someone in your position to adopt 4 children at once." Thomas felt a fierce determination rise within him. "Then we'll overcome those hurdles. I'll do whatever it takes, Claire. These kids, they filled a void I didn't even know was there. I can't lose them now." Claire smiled softly, a mix of admiration and concern in her eyes. "You've really changed, Thomas Blackwood. Who would have thought the focused businessman I met at the charity event would become such a devoted dad?" Thomas laughed quietly, the sound tinged with emotion. "Certainly not me. But now I can't imagine my life any other way." That night, after Claire left, Thomas found himself standing at the door to the children's room, watching them sleep. Paul was curled protectively around one of the babies, while the other 2 slept peacefully in their makeshift cribs. The scene before him was so different from anything he had ever known, so far removed from the world of business and corporate ambitions that had always defined his life. And yet, it felt more right, more complete, than any professional success he had ever achieved. Thomas felt a solitary tear roll down his face, a swirl of emotions overflowing his heart. Love, fear, hope, determination, all mingled in a whirlwind threatening to consume him. Silently, he entered the room, adjusting the blankets and checking that the children were comfortable. His fingers gently brushed Paul's hair, and the boy stirred in his sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. "I'll protect you," Thomas whispered, his voice laden with emotion. "No matter what happens, I'll keep you safe and together, I promise." As he turned to leave the room, Thomas noticed something on the floor near Paul's bed. Bending down, he picked up a crumpled piece of paper. Carefully unfolding it, his heart skipped a beat when he recognized Paul's childish handwriting. It was a drawing made with colored pencils. It showed 5 stick figures, 4 small ones and 1 tall one. The taller figure seemed to be wearing a suit, and above it was written, in shaky letters, "Daddy Thomas." Thomas felt his heart constrict with an emotion he couldn't name. Carefully, he folded the drawing and put it in his pocket, promising himself he would keep it forever. Returning to his office, Thomas sank heavily into his chair, the reality of his situation pressing down on him. Claire's words echoed in his mind, reminding him of the legal and emotional challenges still to come. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, Thomas felt a renewed determination stirring inside him. Picking up his phone, he dialed a number he rarely used. "Hello, Margaret. It's Thomas, Mom. I need to talk to you. Something's happened, something that changed everything." As he began telling his mother the story, Thomas felt as though he was finally connecting all the pieces of his life. The lonely boy who grew up without a father, the successful yet emotionally distant businessman, and now this new Thomas, a man willing to move mountains to protect 4 children who had come into his life by chance. The conversation with Margaret lasted well into the night. Tears were shed, promises made. And when he finally hung up, Thomas felt lighter, more complete than ever before. Gazing out the window of his office at the city that never slept, Thomas Blackwood made a silent promise to the stars. He would find Sophie, give these children the family they deserved, and in the process, perhaps finally find the answers he had been longing for all his life. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with legal and emotional obstacles. But for the first time in his life, Thomas wasn't afraid of the unknown. He had a purpose now, something greater than himself to fight for. With one last look at the children's room, Thomas finally allowed himself to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges but also new joys. The solitary entrepreneur had become a father at heart, and there was no going back. The journey had only just begun. Morning came quickly as Thomas's alarm went off, echoing through the mansion, now buzzing with the energy of 4 small children. He got up, rubbing his tired eyes, his body still adjusting to the new routine of sleepless nights and hectic mornings. Mr. Thomas! Mr. Thomas! Paul's excited voice sounded in the hallway, followed by the patter of little feet running toward him. Thomas smiled, despite his exhaustion. Morning, champ. Already up? Paul burst into the room, his eyes shining. I helped Miss Claire feed the babies. She said I'm a great helper. Thomas's heart warmed at the boy's enthusiasm. It was amazing how Paul had blossomed in recent weeks, going from a frightened and distrustful child to a cheerful, curious kid. You're incredible, Paul, Thomas praised, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. Now, how about helping me pick a tie for my meeting today? As Paul seriously inspected Thomas's ties, the businessman couldn't help but notice the contrast between his current life and the one he had led only a few weeks ago. The oppressive silence that once dominated the mansion had been replaced by children's laughter, the occasional cry, and a constant hum of life. Claire appeared at the door, carrying one of the triplets. Good morning, Thomas. Remember, you have that important board meeting at 9. Thomas nodded, feeling a twinge of guilt. Lately, his mind had been so focused on the children and the search for Sophie that his professional duties had taken a back seat. Thanks, Claire. I don't know what I'd do without you, he said, his voice full of genuine gratitude. Claire smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. That's what I'm here for. Now go, before you're late again. Thomas rushed out, giving Paul a quick kiss on the forehead and gently patting the baby's head in Claire's arms before leaving. As he drove to the office, his mind swung between professional worries and thoughts of the children. Arriving at his company's headquarters, Thomas was immediately intercepted by his assistant, Sarah, who looked distressed. Mr. Blackwood, thank goodness you're here. Mr. Hendricks from the board called 3 times this morning. He seems concerned. Thomas felt his stomach sink. George Hendricks was known for his impatience and unwavering focus on results. If he was worried, things were worse than Thomas had imagined. Thanks, Sarah. Please schedule a call with him for this afternoon. Entering his office, Thomas was greeted by an intimidating pile of paperwork and unread reports. He sighed, realizing how much work had piled up while his attention was divided. The board meeting was tense from the start. Thomas could sense the skeptical looks and worried faces of his colleagues as he presented the company's latest figures. Thomas, George Hendricks interrupted, his voice sharp. These numbers are significantly below our projections. What's going on? Thomas hesitated, aware he couldn't reveal the real reason for his recent distraction. We've encountered some unexpected challenges, George, but I'm confident we can turn this around. Unexpected challenges, George repeated, unmistakable skepticism in his tone. Thomas, there have been rumors, rather peculiar rumors about your personal life. The board is concerned this may be affecting your judgment and leadership. Thomas felt his blood run cold. He knew he couldn't keep his situation a secret forever, but he hadn't expected word to spread so quickly. My personal life has no bearing on my ability to lead this company, Thomas replied, striving to keep his voice steady. I ask that you trust me and my vision for Blackwood Construction." The meeting continued, but Thomas could feel the board's trust wavering. When it finally ended, he retreated to his office, his head pounding with the pressure. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "The kids are fine. Paul asked if you'll be home in time to read him a story before bed." Thomas smiled sadly, his heart torn between his professional responsibilities and his growing love for the children. He replied quickly, "I'll do my best. Tell him Daddy Thomas has a special story tonight." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, calls, and overdue emails. Thomas struggled to focus, but his mind kept wandering back to the mansion, to Paul and the triplets, to the unsolved mystery of Sophie. When he finally managed to leave the office, it was past 9 at night. Thomas drove home with a heavy feeling of guilt in his chest. Upon arriving, he found Claire in the living room reading a book. "Are they asleep?" Thomas asked, his voice low and weary. Claire nodded, a sympathetic smile on her lips. "Paul tried to stay awake, but sleep won out. He left this for you." She handed Thomas a drawing. It featured 5 figures, 4 small and 1 large, all holding hands. At the top, written in childish handwriting, were the words "My family." Thomas felt tears well up in his eyes. "Claire, I don't know what to do. The company is struggling. The board is questioning my leadership, but these kids, they need me. I need them." Claire approached, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Thomas, you're doing the best you can in an impossible situation. No one could balance all this perfectly." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Thomas felt a connection that went beyond professional gratitude. Claire wasn't just a competent social worker. She had become a friend, a confidant, someone he trusted implicitly. "Thank you, Claire," Thomas said softly. "I don't know how I'd have faced all this without you." Claire smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I'm here to help, Thomas, always." That night, lying in his bed, Thomas reflected on how drastically his life had changed in so little time. The ambitious, lonely businessman he had been just a few weeks ago seemed like a completely different person now. The following days brought new challenges. Thomas struggled to balance his responsibilities at the company with his commitment to the children. He arrived at the office earlier, worked through lunch, and stayed late, trying to make up for lost time. But no matter how hard he tried, it was clear something had to give. Important projects began to stall. Clients expressed concern at his lack of personal attention, and rumors about his personal life continued to swirl. One particularly difficult afternoon, Thomas was summoned to George Hendricks's office. The senior board member regarded him with a mix of disappointment and concern. "Thomas, I can't ignore what's happening anymore," George began, his voice grave. "Your performance in the past few months has been well below the standard we set for this company. The board is considering changes in leadership." The words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. The company he had built from the ground up, the legacy he had always dreamed of leaving behind, was now at risk. "George, I understand your concern," Thomas replied, fighting to maintain his composure. "I've had some personal challenges recently, but I can assure you I'm fully committed to the success of Blackwood Construction." George studied him for a long moment. "Thomas, I've always admired your vision and determination, but a company of this size can't be run part-time. Whatever's happening in your personal life, you need to resolve it, and fast." Thomas left the meeting feeling stunned. For the first time in his career, he faced the real possibility of losing everything he had built professionally. And the most surprising thing was that part of him wondered if it really mattered as much as it once did. Arriving home that night, Thomas was greeted by a scene that instantly warmed his heart. Paul was in the living room, reading a story to the triplets, who watched him with wide-eyed adoration. Claire sat nearby, watching with a fond smile. "Daddy Thomas!" Paul exclaimed when he saw him, running over for a hug. Thomas scooped him up, feeling the weight of the day melt away at the simple gesture of affection. "Hey, champ! Looks like you're taking great care of your little siblings." Claire approached, her eyes immediately noticing the tension in Thomas's shoulders. "Rough day?" she asked gently. Thomas nodded, setting Paul back on the floor. Can we talk after the kids go to bed?" Hours later, with the children finally asleep, Thomas and Claire sat on the porch, each holding a cup of tea. "They want to remove me from the company's leadership," Thomas confessed, emotion heavy in his voice. "Everything I built, my legacy, it's collapsing." Claire listened attentively, her eyes filled with understanding and something else Thomas couldn't quite name. "Thomas," she began softly, "what do you consider your real legacy now? The company or this?" She gestured toward the house, where the children slept peacefully. The question took Thomas by surprise. He remained silent for a long moment, reflecting. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You know, Claire, I always thought success meant having the tallest skyscraper, closing the biggest deal. But now," he paused, glancing toward the children's rooms. "Now I see what really matters," Claire smiled, her eyes glowing with something that looked a lot like admiration. "You've become an amazing man, Thomas Blackwood." Thomas turned to her, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. "I couldn't have done it without you, Claire. You've been everything." For a moment, the air between them felt charged with electricity. Thomas found himself leaning toward Claire, his heart pounding. But before anything could happen, one of the babies began to cry inside the house. The moment passed and both of them stood up quickly. "I'll take care of it," Claire said, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "You should rest." As Claire walked away, Thomas remained on the porch, his thoughts in turmoil. He knew he was developing feelings for Claire that went beyond gratitude and friendship. But with everything happening, the search for Sophie, the precarious situation at the company, the children, was this the right time to explore those feelings? In the days that followed, Thomas felt increasingly torn between his declining corporate world and his thriving family life. Each smile from Paul, each giggle from the triplets, each glance shared with Claire made him question his life priorities. One particularly challenging afternoon at the office, after another tense meeting with the board, Thomas found himself gazing out his office window at the city he once lived for. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire, a photo of Paul helping feed one of the triplets, captioned, "Your little helper is doing great." In that instant, Thomas had an epiphany. No matter what happened to his career or his professional reputation, he had found something far more valuable. He had found a family. With a newfound determination, Thomas began forming plans. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be huge obstacles ahead. The search for Sophie was still ongoing, the children's legal status was complicated, and his position at the company was on thin ice. But for the first time in his life, Thomas Blackwood wasn't afraid of the future. He had a greater purpose than any skyscraper or million-dollar contract. He had love, he had a family, and he had Claire by his side. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in orange and pink hues, Thomas made a silent promise. Whatever the future held, professional challenges, legal hurdles, emotional entanglements, he would face it all with courage and determination, because now he knew what really mattered. The chapter of his life as an unyielding business magnate might be coming to an end, but a new chapter, far richer and more meaningful, was just beginning, and Thomas could hardly wait to see what the next pages would bring. Over the weeks that followed, Thomas found himself in a constant battle to balance his professional life with his new personal responsibilities. Each day brought new challenges, both at the office and at home. At the company, projects continued to suffer delays, and pressure from the board intensified. Thomas spent endless hours in meetings, trying to calm worried investors and motivate a team that was beginning to doubt his leadership. Whispered conversations in the hallways grew louder, and Thomas could feel the questioning stares that followed him everywhere he went. At home, however, a remarkable transformation was taking place. The once cold and impersonal mansion now overflowed with life and love. Paul, in particular, was flourishing under the care of Thomas and Claire. The timid, fearful child they had found in the hotel's basement was now a joyful, curious boy, always eager to share his daily discoveries with Daddy Thomas. The triplets, in turn, were growing visibly. Their first steps, their first words, each milestone was celebrated with enthusiasm by Thomas, who was surprised at the depth of his feelings for these children who had entered his life so unexpectedly. Claire watched this transformation with a mix of admiration and a deeper emotion she was not yet ready to name. The Thomas Blackwood she had met at the charity event, cold, calculating, and focused solely on business, had given way to a compassionate, patient, and profoundly loving man. One evening, after tucking the children into bed, Thomas found Claire on the porch, gazing thoughtfully at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, joining her. Claire turned to him, her eyes shimmering in the moonlight. "How life can change so drastically in such a short time," she replied. "Thomas, do you realize how much you've grown? How much you've changed?" Thomas thought for a moment before answering. "You know, Claire, I always thought success was about having the biggest tower, closing the biggest deal. But now," he glanced toward the children's rooms, "now I realize what truly matters." Claire smiled, gently placing her hand on his. "You've become an incredible man, Thomas Blackwood." The moment between them was charged with unspoken emotion. Thomas found himself leaning toward Claire, his heart racing. But before anything could happen, the cry of one of the babies echoed through the house. "I'll take care of it," Claire said quickly, moving away with a slight blush on her cheeks. Thomas remained on the porch, his heart in turmoil. He knew he was developing deeper feelings for Claire, feelings that went beyond mere gratitude. But with everything that was happening, the unresolved search for Sophie, the precarious situation at the company, the children, was it really the right moment? In the days that followed, Thomas found himself increasingly torn between his corporate world in decline and his blossoming family life. Every smile from Paul, every laugh from the triplets, every look exchanged with Claire only made him question his life choices more. One particularly stressful day at the office, after yet another tense board meeting, Thomas found himself staring out the window of his office, overlooking the city that once held his sole focus. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire, a photo of Paul helping feed one of the triplets, captioned, "Your little helper is doing a great job." In that moment, Thomas had a revelation. It no longer mattered what happened to his career or his professional reputation. He had found something far more valuable. He had found a family. With fresh determination, Thomas began drafting plans. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Huge challenges lay ahead. The search for Sophie was still ongoing. The children's legal status was complicated, and his position at the company was precarious. But for the first time in his life, Thomas Blackwood wasn't scared of the future. He had a purpose more significant than any skyscraper or million-dollar deal. He had love, he had a family, and he had Claire by his side. Early one morning, Thomas arrived at his office at Blackwood Construction. His eyes were tired, but they gleamed with fierce determination. Today was the day the search for Sophie would intensify. "Jenkins," Thomas called for his assistant as soon as he arrived, "assemble the investigation team. We have work to do." Within minutes, the conference room was bustling. Private investigators, data analysts, and even a few trusted company employees were present. Claire, who had become a constant presence in Thomas's life, stood by his side. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas began, his voice firm, "our mission is clear. We need to find Sophie Lawson. Every day that passes is another day these children live in uncertainty. I want you to use every resource at our disposal, but with absolute discretion." "Understood." The team nodded in unison, and soon the room was buzzing with activity. Computer screens flashed with information, phones rang incessantly, and piles of documents were scrutinized in search of the smallest clue. Claire approached Thomas, her voice low. "Are you sure about this, Thomas? Using the company's resources for a personal search, the board won't like it." Thomas looked at her, his eyes reflecting a blend of determination and vulnerability. "I know, Claire, but I can't separate my personal life from my professional one anymore. These children, Sophie, they become part of who I am." Days turned into weeks, and the search for Sophie intensified. Thomas and Claire plunged headfirst into the investigation, combing through employment records, contacting former colleagues from the hotel, and analyzing countless databases. Each new piece of information offered a clearer picture of Sophie's life. Former co-workers described a dedicated, hard-working woman who always had a smile despite her struggles. Employment records showed a series of temp jobs after the hotel closed, each lasting shorter than the last. She was fighting, Claire murmured one evening, as she and Thomas reviewed the latest findings, trying to keep her head above water to care for the children. Thomas felt his heart clench. Sophie's story was a painful reminder of the hardships many people faced, hardships he, in his corporate ivory tower, had often ignored. As the search intensified, Thomas found himself increasingly torn between his responsibilities at the company and his dedication to Sophie and the children. Important meetings were rescheduled, crucial decisions delayed, and murmurs of discontent on the board grew louder each day. One afternoon, as Thomas pored over a stack of reports about Sophie, George Hendricks walked into his office without warning. "Thomas," his voice was grave, "the board has called an emergency meeting. Your leadership is under scrutiny. We need you there now." Thomas looked at the papers on his desk, at Sophie's photo, and then back at George. In that moment, he realized he was reaching a tipping point. "Tell the board I'll be there in an hour," he replied, his voice firm. "There's something I need to do first." As soon as George left, Thomas called Claire. "Meet me at home. We need to talk to the kids." Half an hour later, Thomas was seated in his living room, Paul in his lap, and the triplets playing on the nearby rug. Claire sat beside him, her face a mask of concern. "Paul," Thomas began gently, "remember when we talked about your mum, about how we were looking for her?" Paul nodded, his big eyes locked on Thomas. "Did you find her?" Thomas felt his heart clench. "Not yet, buddy, but we're doing everything we can, and when we do find her, well, things might change a bit." Paul frowned, confused. "Change how?" Thomas exchanged a glance with Claire before continuing. "Your mum might want you to go live with her again, and that would be good, wouldn't it? You do miss her, right?" Paul was quiet for a long moment, his small face reflecting a mix of emotions. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling. "But what about you, Daddy Thomas? Aren't you coming with us?" The boy's words hit Thomas like a punch in the stomach. He pulled Paul into a tight embrace, fighting back the tears threatening to fall. "Urge Paul," he whispered. "I'll always be here for you. Always. No matter what happens." After the children were put to bed, Thomas and Claire returned to the porch, the place that had become their haven for difficult conversations. "Thomas," Claire began softly, "do you realize how much you've already done for these kids? No matter what happens when we find Sophie, you've changed their lives forever." Thomas looked at her, tears unshed in his eyes. "But what if it's not enough, Claire? What if I have to give them back and never see them again? How can I just go back to my old life, knowing what I know now, feeling what I feel?" Claire took his hand, squeezing gently. "You can't, and you shouldn't. Thomas, you've changed. You've grown. The man you were before, the ruthless businessman focused only on profits, he doesn't exist anymore. And that's a good thing." Thomas nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "But the company, Claire, my legacy, everything I've worked for, it's important," Claire conceded, "but maybe not in the way you thought before. Think of all the good you can do with Blackwood Construction's resources. Think of how many lives you can change, how many families you can help." Claire's words sparked something in Thomas's mind. A vision of a different future, one with deeper meaning, started to take shape. "You're right," he finally said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe it's time to redefine what success means to me." At that moment, Thomas's phone rang. It was Jenkins, the head of the investigation team. "Mr. Blackwood," Jenkins's voice was urgent, "we have a new lead. It's not definitive, but it's promising." Thomas felt his heart pound. He looked at Claire, seeing his own mixture of hope and apprehension reflected in her eyes. "Keep investigating, Jenkins. Don't stop until we're sure." Hanging up, Thomas turned to Claire. "The search goes on," he said, his voice a blend of determination and exhaustion. Claire nodded, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "And we'll keep going together, Thomas. One step at a time." They stood under the starry sky, the night embracing the house in its dark cloak. Thomas knew the road ahead was still long and uncertain, but with Claire by his side and the children in his heart, he felt ready to face whatever the future held. As the night deepened, Thomas and Claire remained on the porch, the silence between them comfortable and laden with reflection. A gentle evening breeze carried the scent of the garden flowers, a quiet reminder of the life that flourished around them, even amid the uncertainty. Thomas broke the silence, his voice low and thoughtful. "Claire, do you think we're doing the right thing? Sometimes I wonder if this entire search is causing more harm than good." Claire turned to him, her eyes soft in the dim light. "Thomas, you're giving these children something they never had before. Stability, safety, and unconditional love. That can never be a mistake." He nodded slowly, taking in her words. "And what about the company? I'm risking everything I've worked for years." "Sometimes," Claire answered, "we have to risk everything to gain something far more valuable." Thomas reflected on that for a moment, then a small smile formed on his lips. "You know, when I bought that abandoned hotel, I never imagined I'd be here, having this conversation, feeling all of this." Claire smiled back, her hand finding his in a comforting gesture. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" At that moment, one of the babies let out a soft cry inside the house. Thomas stood immediately, his body reacting instinctively to the sound. "I'll handle it," he said, but Claire was already on her feet beside him. "Let's go together," she suggested, and Thomas felt a wave of gratitude for her unwavering presence. As they walked inside, side by side, Thomas realized that no matter what happened with Sophie's search, his life had changed irrevocably. He was no longer just Thomas Blackwood, the ruthless businessman. He was Thomas, the protector, the caregiver, Daddy Thomas in Paul's eyes. In the children's room, Thomas picked up the crying baby, rocking her gently. Claire stood by the door, smiling softly. "Shh, it's okay," Thomas murmured to the baby. "Daddy's here. We're all here for you." As the baby calmed in his arms, Thomas looked around the room. Paul was sleeping peacefully, one arm draped protectively around a triplet who had crawled into his bed. It all felt so right. Placing the now sleeping baby back in her crib, Thomas joined Claire at the door. Together, they looked at the children for a moment before stepping out quietly. In the hallway, Thomas turned to Claire, his voice low but determined. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, Claire, but I know that with you and these kids, I can face anything." Claire smiled, her eyes shining with what looked very much like affection. "Together, Thomas, we'll face it all together." As they returned to the porch, the night enveloping the house in its dark silence, Thomas felt a peace he hadn't experienced in weeks. The search for Sophie continued. The challenges at the company persisted, but here, in this moment, with his makeshift family, he was exactly where he needed to be. The night's chapter closed, but the story of Thomas, Claire, and the children was far from over. Each new day would bring a new chapter, filled with challenges, joys, and above all, love. And Thomas was eager to turn every page. Morning arrived with a brightness that contrasted sharply with Thomas Blackwood's inner turmoil. As he got ready for the day, his mind kept returning to the conversation he had had the previous night with Claire, and to the still unanswered questions about his inexplicable connection to the abandoned hotel. With a deep sigh, Thomas grabbed his phone and dialed a number he didn't use as often as he should. "Hello, Mom, it's Thomas. I need to talk to you. Can I stop by today?" Margaret's voice on the other end was a mix of surprise and concern. "Thomas, my dear, of course you can. Is everything all right?" "Yes, there are some things we need to discuss. I'll be there in an hour." Ending the call, Thomas turned to find Claire standing in his bedroom doorway, a cup of coffee in each hand. "You're going to visit your mom?" she asked, handing him one of the cups. Thomas nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Yes, there are some questions only she can answer. Can you stay with the kids?" Claire smiled gently. "Of course, Thomas. Take all the time you need." An hour later, Thomas was standing outside the modest house where he had grown up. So many memories were tied to this place, some sweet, some bittersweet. Taking a steadying breath, he rang the bell. Margaret opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of her son. "Thomas, come in, come in. I made your favorite cake." As they settled in the familiar living room, Thomas felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him. The photos on the walls, the lavender scent in the air, everything so familiar yet somehow different now. "So, dear," Margaret began, pouring tea, "what brings you here so early? You sounded worried on the phone." Thomas held the teacup, feeling its warmth. "Mom, I need to ask you something. About my dad." Margaret's smile faltered briefly, a shadow passing through her eyes. "Oh, Thomas, I thought we'd already talked about that years ago." "I know, Mom, but something happened. Something that made me question, well, everything." And so, Thomas began telling her about the abandoned hotel, about the children he'd found, and about the strange connection he'd felt to the place from the start. Margaret listened in silence, her face a mask of contained emotions. When Thomas finished, she remained quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on a distant point. "Oh, my dear boy," she finally said, her voice trembling, "I think it's time you knew the whole truth." Thomas felt his heart quicken. "What truth, Mum?" Margaret took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Thomas, when I was young, long before you were born, I worked in that hotel. I was a receptionist there. And the owner was a man named Richard Hartley." Thomas felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. "Richard Hartley? Mom, what are you saying?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Richard was a wonderful man, Thomas. Kind, charismatic, full of dreams. We fell in love. It was a brief but intense romance. And then I found out I was pregnant." Thomas stood still, her words echoing in his ears. "You're telling me Richard? He's my father?" Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes, Thomas. Richard Hartley is your biological father." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas abruptly stood up, walking to the window, his mind in a whirlwind of emotions and conflicting thoughts. "Why did you never tell me?" he finally asked, his voice strained. Margaret joined him at the window, gently placing her hand on his arm. "Oh, Thomas, I wanted to so many times, but the social gap between us was huge. Richard came from an influential family, and I was just an employee. I was afraid he'd try to take you away from me, or worse, he'd reject the idea of having a child altogether." Thomas turned to face his mother, searching her eyes for answers. "Does he know about me?" Margaret shook her head. "No, dear. By the time I discovered I was pregnant, Richard was already off on one of his long business trips. I decided it was best for everyone if I just disappeared. I quit my job at the hotel and moved here to start over." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in Thomas's mind. His inexplicable pull toward the hotel, the sense of familiarity he'd felt, everything finally made sense. "Mom," he said gently, "do you have any idea where Richard might be now?" Margaret sighed. "No, dear. I lost touch with everyone from that time, but his name was quite known in certain business circles. Maybe you can find him, if you really want to." Thomas nodded slowly, already formulating plans. "Thank you for telling me, Mom. I know it must have been hard to keep this secret for so long." Margaret smiled sadly. "You've always been the best thing that ever happened to me, Thomas. I hope one day you can forgive me for not telling you sooner." Thomas embraced his mother, feeling the weight of the years and secrets between them. "There's nothing to forgive, Mom. You did what you thought was best at the time." When Thomas finally left his mother's house hours later, his head was spinning with the day's revelations. Driving back to his mansion, he couldn't stop thinking about how his life had become a complex web of connections and coincidences. Arriving home, Thomas found Claire playing with the children in the yard. The domestic scene, so unlike his life just a few weeks ago, struck him with surprising force. "Thomas!" Claire called, noticing his troubled expression. "Are you okay?" He nodded slowly, joining them on the grass. "Yes, I found out some things about my past. Things that change everything." While the children continued playing, oblivious to adult concerns, Thomas shared with Claire the revelations he had learned from his mother. Claire listened carefully, her eyes growing wider with every new piece of information. "Oh, Thomas," she said gently when he finished, "that's incredible. Do you plan to look for Richard?" Thomas nodded, his eyes on the children. "Yes, I think I need to. Not just for me, but for them, too. If we're going to build a family here, they deserve to know the full truth about their origins. Claire placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Whatever you decide to do, I'll be here to support you. That night, after the children were tucked into bed, Thomas found himself in his office, surrounded by paperwork and his laptop. The search for Sophie continued, but now he had a new mission: finding Richard Hartley. As he dug through old business records and news articles, Thomas couldn't help but notice the parallels between his own story and Sophie's. They both had missing parents, though for very different reasons. They both had a chance at a second opportunity to right past wrongs. Hours passed, and Thomas grew increasingly immersed in his research. It wasn't until he felt a gentle hand on his shoulder that he realized how much time had gone by. "Thomas?" Claire's voice was soft. "It's past 3 in the morning. You need to rest." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. "I know. I just feel like I'm so close to finding something." Claire sat down next to him, her eyes full of concern. "Thomas, son, I know how important all this is, but you can't forget to take care of yourself. The children need you. We need you." Thomas looked at her, noticing for the first time the weariness in his own eyes. Claire had been by his side through every step of this crazy journey, offering support, comfort, and wisdom. Suddenly, he found himself imagining a future where she was always there, not just as a social worker or friend, but as something more. "You're right," he finally said. "I'll get some sleep. But tomorrow, I have some tough decisions to make." The next morning, Thomas woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. After having breakfast with the children and Claire, he headed to his office at Blackwood Construction. George Hendricks was already waiting, his face tense with worry. "Thomas, the board wants answers. We can't keep postponing key decisions." Thomas nodded, taking a seat behind his desk. "I know, George. That's why I asked you here today." "I've made a decision." George leaned forward, anxious. "And what is it?" "I'm stepping back from the day-to-day management of the company, temporarily," Thomas declared, his voice steady. "I need to resolve some urgent personal matters, and I can't keep splitting my attention like this. It's not fair to the company or my family." George looked stunned. "Thomas, you can't be serious. The company needs you." "The company needs a fully committed leader, George, and right now, I can't be that person. I trust you and the rest of the team to keep things running while I handle these matters." After a long discussion and much resistance, George finally agreed to the temporary arrangement. Thomas left his office feeling as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew there were risks to his decision, but for the first time in his life, he felt he was doing the right thing for reasons beyond profit and business success. Returning home, Thomas found Claire on the porch, watching the children play in the garden. "How did it go?" she asked, noticing his expression. "Hard," Thomas admitted, "but necessary. I decided to step away from the company for a while to focus on these personal searches." Claire studied him for a moment before smiling softly. "I'm proud of you, Thomas. I know it couldn't have been an easy decision." Thomas felt his heart warm at her praise. "It wasn't, but I feel like it's the right thing to do. For the kids, for Sophie, for Richard, and for myself." As they watched Paul run across the lawn, chasing a butterfly with the triplets crawling after him, Thomas felt a surge of determination. He would find Richard and Sophie. He would give these children the family they deserved. And in doing so, maybe he would finally find the answers he'd been looking for all his life. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the yard. Thomas looked at Claire, at the children, and then back at the sunset. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges and possible heartbreak. But for the first time, Thomas Blackwood looked forward to facing the unknown, not for profit or success, but for love and family. With a gentle smile, he took Claire's hand, feeling the promise of a new beginning. Together, they watched the sun go down, ready for any challenge tomorrow might bring. The chapter of his life as an unyielding business magnate might be ending, but a new chapter full of search, redemption, and love was only just beginning. And Thomas could hardly wait to turn the next page. As night fell, Thomas and Claire stayed on the porch, watching as the stars dotted the darkened sky. The children were already asleep, the silence broken only by the soft chirping of crickets. "Claire," Thomas said gently, turning to her, "I want to thank you. For everything. I don't know how I would have handled all this without you." Claire smiled, her eyes glimmering in the faint light. "You're stronger than you think, Thomas. But I'm glad I get to be here with you and with all of you." A charged silence fell between them, unspoken words hanging in the air. Thomas felt his heart pound, so aware now of how important Claire had become to him. "What happens next?" Claire asked, her voice almost a whisper. Thomas took a deep breath, gazing at the horizon. "Now, we really begin our search. For Sophie, for Richard, now for answers. It won't be easy, but we'll do it together," Claire finished, her hand finding Thomas's. Thomas nodded, gently squeezing her hand. Together. As they stepped into the house, Thomas paused by the children's room. Paul slept soundly, an arm protectively draped over one of the triplets who'd crawled into his bed. The sight filled Thomas with a mix of love and renewed determination. "I'm going to give you the family you deserve," he promised quietly, "no matter what happens." That night, lying in his bed, Thomas mulled over everything that had happened and everything that lay ahead. The revelation about his biological father, the ongoing search for Sophie, his temporary departure from the company, it all felt like part of a larger plan he still didn't fully understand. But one thing was certain. Thomas Blackwood was no longer the same man who had impulsively bought an abandoned hotel. He had found a greater purpose, a sense of family he never knew he wanted so desperately. With that comforting thought, Thomas finally fell asleep, prepared to face the challenges the new day would bring. The road ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and perhaps more startling revelations. But with Claire by his side and his love for the children guiding him, Thomas felt ready for anything. The chapter of his life as the relentless business magnate had ended. A new chapter, one of searching, redemption, and love, was only beginning. And Thomas couldn't wait to turn the page. Dawn had barely broken when Thomas's phone rang, jolting him awake from restless sleep. His heart pounded as he saw Jenkins's name, the private investigator he'd hired to find Sophie, flash on the screen. "Jenkins? What's going on?" Thomas asked, his voice husky from sleep but immediately alert. "Mr. Blackwood, we found her. Sophie is at a women's shelter in Millbrook, the neighboring town." Thomas felt a wave of emotions crash over him, relief, anxiety, hope. "Are you sure it's her?" "Absolutely, sir. We have visual confirmation, and all the details match." Thomas took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. "Thank you, Jenkins. Send me the address." "I'll go in person." Ending the call, Thomas turned to see Claire already awake, her eyes filled with concern and anticipation. "They've found Sophie," he said simply. Claire nodded, immediately grasping the gravity of the situation. "I'll get dressed. We'll go together." As they hurried to get ready, Thomas couldn't stop thinking about the children still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the monumental change about to occur in their lives. The drive to Millbrook was wrapped in tense silence. Thomas kept his eyes on the road, while Claire periodically checked the GPS to ensure they were headed in the right direction. Arriving at the shelter, a modest but well-kept building, Thomas and Claire were greeted by a social worker named Maria. "Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Thompson." Maria welcomed them with a firm handshake. "Sophie is waiting for you. I should warn you, she's quite nervous and emotionally fragile." Thomas nodded, feeling his own nervousness spike. "We understand. May we see her now?" Maria led them down a hallway to a small meeting room. There, sitting at a table with her hands clasped together, was Sophie. The moment their eyes met felt electric. Sophie was younger than Thomas had imagined, her face etched with worry and fatigue, but her eyes were exactly like Paul's. "Sophie," Thomas said gently, stepping forward. "I'm Thomas Blackwood, and this is Claire Thompson. You found my children," Sophie finished, her voice trembling. They're okay." Claire stepped forward, her tone professional but kind. "They're doing great, Sophie. They're safe and well cared for. We'd like to talk to you about them, if that's all right." Sophie nodded, gesturing for them to sit. Thomas noticed her hands trembling slightly. "I never meant to leave them," Sophie began, tears forming in her eyes. "You have to believe me. I just wanted them to be safe." Thomas felt his heart clench. "Sophie, no one here is judging you. We just want to understand what happened." And so, Sophie told her story. She spoke about her job at the hotel, about meeting a man who seemed perfect at first, and about how after the triplets were born, he became controlling and abusive. "I knew I had to get out," Sophie said, wiping her tears, "but he threatened to take the children if I tried to leave. So when the hotel closed and I lost my job, I saw an opportunity. I took the kids and ran away in the middle of the night." Claire gently prompted Sophie to continue, offering her a tissue. "The abandoned hotel seemed like the perfect hiding place. No one would look for us there. I planned to stay just a few nights until I had enough money to go farther. But then," Sophie hesitated, her gaze distant. "Then?" Thomas urged softly. "Then I heard rumors he was looking for me. I was scared to leave, scared of being seen. Days turned into weeks. I only went out to get food and basic supplies. Paul, my sweet Paul, he was so brave, helping so much with the girls." Thomas pictured Paul, the strong and protective boy he had met. It all made sense now. "Sophie," Claire interjected gently, "why didn't you seek help? There are organizations, shelters like this one." Sophie lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "I was scared. Afraid they'd take my children if they found out I was raising them in an abandoned building. Afraid he'd find us if I went through official channels. I wasn't thinking clearly." Thomas leaned forward, his voice gentle yet firm. "Sophie, what matters now is that you're safe, and your children are safe. We're here to help, not judge." Sophie looked at him, fresh tears welling up. "They must hate me. I left them." "No," Thomas interrupted kindly. "They love you. Paul talks about you every day. The girls, they're too young to understand, but I'm sure they'll sense the connection right away." Claire then explained how the children had been found and cared for. With every new piece of information, Sophie's face brightened a little more, her fear giving way to hope. When can I see them?" Sophie asked, her voice barely containing her emotion. Thomas and Claire exchanged a look. "If you feel ready," Claire said, "we can arrange a meeting for tomorrow. But Sophie, we need to be sure you're in a position to care for them, that you have a plan." Sophie nodded vigorously. "I understand. I'm getting help here. Therapy, job counseling. I want to do it right this time, for my kids." Thomas felt a wave of admiration for this woman who, despite everything, was fighting to rebuild her life. In that moment, an idea began to form in his mind. "Sophie," he said, "I have a proposal for you, but first I think it's time for you to be reunited with your children." The next day dawned bright and full of promise. Thomas had spent the night preparing the children, explaining that their mother had been found and wanted to see them. Paul alternated between excitement and nerves, while the triplets, too young to fully grasp the situation, seemed to sense the anxious energy around them. The reunion was arranged in the garden of Thomas's mansion. When Sophie arrived with Claire, Thomas felt his heart pound. This moment would change everything. "Mom!" Paul's shout cut through the air, and before anyone could react, the boy was running toward Sophie. Sophie dropped to her knees, enveloping Paul in a tight hug, tears streaming freely down her face. "My boy, my brave boy," she murmured between sobs. The triplets, seeing the commotion, began fussing in their strollers. Thomas gently lifted them, carrying them over to Sophie. "Sophie," he said softly, "your girls are here." Sophie looked up, her eyes wide as she saw the triplets. With trembling hands, she touched each of their faces, broken sobs escaping her lips. "They've grown so much," she whispered. "Oh, my babies." Thomas stepped back, letting the family reconnect. At his side, Claire discreetly wiped away a tear. "It's quite a sight, isn't it?" she murmured. Thomas nodded, his own vision blurred. "It is. It's perfect." In the days that followed, Thomas worked tirelessly on his new plan. The idea that had sparked during his talk with Sophie had grown into a full-fledged vision. One sunny morning, he gathered his team of executives at the site of the old hotel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas began, his voice brimming with determination, "I know we plan to turn this place into a luxury resort, but I have a new vision." He went on to describe his plan to restore the hotel to its former glory while preserving its historical essence, modernizing where necessary. "More than that," Thomas continued, "I want this hotel to become a symbol of second chances. We'll prioritize hiring former staff, people who lost their jobs when the hotel shut down. And we'll reserve a portion of the rooms for a transition program, helping families coming out of hard situations find stability." There was a murmur among the executives. As usual, George Hendricks was the first to speak. "Thomas, I understand your enthusiasm, but this plan isn't as profitable as the original." The shareholders will see the long-term value," Thomas interrupted. "This isn't just a hotel, George. It's an investment in the community, in people. And trust me, the returns will go beyond any numbers on a spreadsheet." As the discussion continued, Thomas noticed Claire watching from a distance, a proud smile on her face. He knew she understood, perhaps better than anyone, what he was trying to accomplish. The following weeks were a flurry of activity. The hotel restoration began in earnest, with Thomas personally overseeing every detail. Sophie, now an integral part of the project, was hired to lead the hospitality team, her previous experience in the hotel proving invaluable. During one of those hectic weeks, Thomas received the call that would once again change everything. "Mr. Blackwood," the voice on the other end sounded tentative. "This is St. Mary's Nursing Home. We have a resident here, Richard Hartley, who claims to be your father." Thomas felt the world spin for a moment. Richard, his biological father. After weeks of searching, he had finally been found. The next day, Thomas stood before the nursing home, his heart pounding. Claire was by his side, her presence a quiet reassurance. "Are you ready for this?" she asked gently. Thomas took a deep breath. "I don't think I'll ever be fully ready. But I have to do this." Richard Hartley was seated in a wheelchair near the window when Thomas entered the room. Despite his age and apparent frailty, Thomas could see traces of himself in the older man's features. "Richard," Thomas called softly. The man turned, his eyes widening at the sight of Thomas. "My God," he whispered, "it's you. You look just like her." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "Like who?" "Margaret," Richard replied, his voice breaking. "Your mother. I always wondered if she had a child. If I had a child." The hours that followed were an emotional whirlwind. Richard shared his story, how he had fallen in love with Margaret, how family and social pressures tore them apart, how he had always regretted not fighting harder for her. "I searched for her, you know," Richard said, tears rolling down his wrinkled cheeks. "But she disappeared, and then life went on. But I never forgot." Thomas listened, his own heart heavy with conflicting emotions, anger at his absence, sorrow for the lost years, yet a strange sense of kinship with this man who was part of him. "The hotel," Richard said suddenly, his eyes lighting up. "I heard it's being restored. Are you the one doing it?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, I'm restoring it to its old grandeur, but with a new purpose." As Thomas explained his vision for the hotel, he saw something change in Richard's gaze. Pride, perhaps, admiration. "You've done something incredible with your life, Thomas," Richard said softly. I wish I'd been there to see it." Thomas felt the tears he'd been holding back finally fall. "It's not too late," he said, his voice trembling. "We have time to build something new." In the months that followed, Thomas's life became a swirl of activities and emotions. The hotel's restoration progressed rapidly, with each day bringing new challenges and discoveries. Richard, now an active part of the project as an honorary advisor, shared stories and valuable insights about the hotel's glory days. Simultaneously, Thomas worked to rebuild his relationship with Margaret. Long conversations, filled with tears and laughter, helped heal old wounds and forge a new understanding between mother and son. Sophie thrived in her new role as head of hospitality, her dedication and knowledge of the hotel proving invaluable. The children, now fully settled into their new life, filled the hotel's corridors with laughter and energy during construction. And at the center of it all was Claire, a constant and comforting presence, offering support, advice, and increasingly frequent glances, filled with a feeling that went beyond mere friendship. Finally, after months of hard work, the grand reopening of the Hartley Blackwood Hotel arrived. Dawn had barely broken when Thomas arrived at the hotel that morning. The lobby, once dusty and abandoned, now gleamed with renewed splendor. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow on the carefully restored antique furniture, while subtle modern touches ensured the hotel met contemporary needs. Sophie was already there, performing a final check with a critical eye. "Good morning, Thomas," she greeted him with a nervous smile. "Are we ready?" Thomas nodded, feeling a mix of pride and anxiety. "As ready as we'll ever be. You did an amazing job, Sophie." Throughout the morning, staff, many of whom were former employees of the hotel, arrived, each bringing a sense of anticipation and renewal. Thomas watched with admiration as Sophie guided them with confidence and kindness. At exactly 10 a.m., the doors of the Hartley Blackwood Hotel officially opened to the public. A crowd was already waiting outside, a mix of curious locals, journalists, and VIP guests. With Claire by his side, Thomas cut the ribbon amid applause. "Welcome to the Hartley Blackwood Hotel," he announced, his voice full of emotion. "A place of history, renewal, and second chances." As guests explored the newly restored hotel, Thomas couldn't help but notice the emotional reactions of several long-time employees back at their old posts. Tears of joy and nostalgia were visible on many faces. Richard, and in his wheelchair guided by Margaret, toured the corridors, his eyes shining with memories and pride. "You did it, son," he told Thomas in a quiet moment. "You brought life back to this place." In the afternoon, during a press conference in the ballroom, Thomas shared his vision for the project. He spoke of second chances, community importance, and how the hotel would be not just a place to stay, but a center for support and renewal for families in need. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Both journalists and guests praised the initiative, seeing it as a model of socially responsible business. As the day wound down, Thomas found himself in the lobby, watching the flow of guests and staff. Claire joined him, intertwining her fingers with his. "You did it, Thomas," she said softly. "Look around. You haven't just transformed a building, you've transformed countless lives." Thomas turned to face her, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "We did it, Claire. I never would have gotten here without you." In that moment, surrounded by the buzz of happy voices and the soft clinking of champagne glasses, Thomas leaned in and kissed Claire gently. It was a kiss full of promise, of a shared future. When they pulled apart, both smiling shyly, the sound of small footsteps made them turn. Paul came running toward them, followed closely by Sophie carrying one of the triplets, while the other two crawled rapidly behind. "Daddy Thomas, Aunt Claire," Paul exclaimed, launching himself into Thomas's arms. "Did you see? The hotel is full of people." Thomas laughed, lifting Paul. "Yes, buddy, it's full of life again." Sophie joined them, her face glowing with happiness. "Thomas, Claire, I don't even know how to thank you. It's more than I ever could have dreamed." Claire smiled, taking one of the triplets from Sophie's arms. "There's no need to thank us, Sophie. We're a family now." As the sun set, casting a golden glow through the lobby windows, Thomas looked around, at Richard and Margaret, chatting animatedly with some guests, at Sophie, radiant in her new role, at Paul and the triplets, growing up happy and safe, and at Claire, the love of his life, beside him. In that moment, Thomas Blackwood realized he had found something far more valuable than any corporate empire. He had found purpose, family, and a home. The Hartley Blackwood Hotel was not just a commercial venture, it was a symbol of renewal, of second chances, and of love. It was the legacy Thomas would leave the world, a testament that it was possible to turn pain into purpose, loneliness into connection, and an abandoned building into a beacon of hope. As night fell over the city, the hotel lights shone like a beacon, promising refuge to anyone seeking a new beginning. And at the center of it all was an unlikely family, united by fate, strengthened by love, and determined to make a difference, one guest at a time. The chapter came to a close, but the story of Thomas, Claire, Sophie, Richard, Margaret, and the children was far from over. In truth, it was only the start of a new and exciting journey, a journey of love, family, and second chances, with the Hartley Blackwood Hotel at its heart.